Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to quickly take you through the emerging use for immunocontraception in India. And I must point out that India does have commonality with other Southeast Asian countries. While everything I say may not be applicable to every country in Southeast Asia, there's definitely commonality across the various regions. Uh, what I'm going to do is quickly look at the rationale for immunocontraception or population management in India, the work that we are doing currently, and the challenges that we've faced so far, and many, many more to come. In terms of the rationale, one of the things that we have been talking about is that the elephant population in India has been stable, if not increasing, and this is a direct result of all the conservation work that we have been doing in the past. In 1992, the government of India started a project called Project Elephant, which put a lot of emphasis on conservation. And historically, we've seen, especially in the Indian context, that intensive conservation has always eventually led to conflict, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but there are times when you need to scale back efforts and look at what you need to do to sort of promote coexistence. While the elephant numbers have gone up or have remained stable, unfortunately, forest land hasn't responded in the way that we wanted it to. There has been minor increase in forest land cover, but historical elephant range states have actually lost green cover, and there has been a lot of fragmentation in elephant habitats. What we do measure as green cover, which we showed an increase by 4 or 5% in the last year, unfortunately, that's not reflective of what it is on the ground. The dense forest and very dense forest where elephants do prefer to stay has gone down, while open forest, which is just patches of green cover, have gone up. That has actually led to an increase in conflict across elephant range states. Human death toll, with data from many states within India missing, has stayed in the mid 400s per year. Elephant death toll has been between 80 and 100 every year. Again, this is with data missing from several states. Uh, despite conflict having been present for many, many years, we still know very little about dynamics of population and dynamics of conflict itself across large spaces like India. The one thing we don't have across the country is fenced reserves like in Africa. All of our national parks are open. The only boundaries we would have is if there is a road that cuts across a national park, just to sort of minimize animals coming onto the road. Otherwise, all the parks are open, not fenced, which allows for constant interaction between animals and people, and not necessarily bad interaction always. Anyway, what we've also been seeing is research that indicates that elephants have actually changed behavior over the years to have a preference in food. Uh, the government of India always talks about forests not being rich enough for elephants to stay there, and that's been proven wrong several times. We've come to now realize that elephants prefer to eat agricultural produce simply because it's less calories spent for more calories gained. We like to order online; they like to do the same. They don't want to go foraging in a forest and pick out grass. Anyway, so many things have been tried to mitigate conflict, including fences that have not worked. There have been physical barricading, like the railroad barricading that I believe is also done in Africa. We've had some horrific elephant deaths on those when they've tried to cross them over and haven't been successful. Bee fences haven't worked in India as well. Uh, there has been efforts by the government to capture elephants and move them, which have actually increased conflicts. This is because this is randomized capture, and it breaks up the herd and it only increases conflict. None of that is, of course, a silver bullet. And where we have failed as managers in the past is trying to look at one solution at a time and saying this should work, and then coming back and saying this doesn't work. It's about time that we realize that any population management tool has to work hand in hand with a whole bunch of conflict management tools for it to be effective in the long run, not even immediate effect. Unfortunately, where the government is looking at population management is, I'm going to vaccinate an elephant today and tomorrow there's going to be no conflict, or maybe day after tomorrow there's going to be no conflict. And that we realize, and we are trying to bring to their attention, that's not going to happen. Another big application for population management is in the captive elephant issues in India. India has about 2,500 captive elephants across the country, and most of them are held in private ownership. There is a lot of live elephant trade being fueled by captive elephants in the country. If I own 2 elephants legally, I am allowed to breed them in captivity. What's happening now in the country is that a lot of elephant calves are being illegally caught in the wild and being smuggled through the system as the ones being born in captivity. So for the 2,500 elephants that are in captivity, the government of India has only issued 500 certificates. So the remaining 2,000 odd are illegally caught from the wild. We believe that population management tools can be imposed as a policy for all privately owned elephants to make sure that they're not breeding them in captivity at all, which will bring in a check for the live elephant trade as well. The current work we're ongoing is, with the support of the government, we have taken on population management of 4 species: wild boar, nilgai, which is a type of ungulate, macaques, and elephants as the first step, while being very aware that practically population management in macaques, wild boar, and nilgai may not be feasible in the wild. Nonetheless, we would like to develop proof of concept and say this method works or this technique works in these species as well. For elephants, we've begun a whole lot of work. We've collared about 13 elephants so far in one project site. While we are collecting data on conflict and population dynamics of this herd, parallelly, we're also doing, we do want to conduct captive trials, so we are in the process of doing standardization of hormonal levels and blood levels in captive facilities, government-owned captive facilities. That's some of the work that we've been doing with the Wildlife Institute of India. We've faced several challenges doing this, and the biggest of them all has been the messaging that goes out from governments and politicians out into the public. This was a headline from a very major newspaper in the country which said sterilization of elephants. And there have been politicians who've been speaking to people in conflict in the media and talking about this as castration as well, because they don't see the difference between what is population management and sterilization and castration. This, of course, has led to a huge uproar in the scientific community, understandably so, thinking that we are hand in hand with the government and saying we'll sterilize all the elephants. And that's absolutely not what we're looking to do. This stems from a lack of understanding of what it is. It's a very, very new concept in India still. Population management itself is a very new concept. Fortunately, given the cultural context of India, culling is off the table for elephants. It's often referred to, is often worshipped as god creature or god animal. So culling is off the table, failing which conflict is rampant and the government is short-handed because they don't know what else to do. But there needs to be more awareness in them so they're saying the right things when they are speaking to public. There also is a huge bit of opposition to any sort of population management of elephants, because most folks are coming from a very privileged standpoint, right? The folks who are in conflict are the ones who recognize the need for it, but the ones who have the loudest voices are not the ones who are in conflict. They're the ones in cities who have access to social media like me, who are always the ones with the loudest voices, not necessarily the most sentient ones. These are folks who are not accommodative of a snake in their house in a city, but want somebody in rural India to live with an elephant in their backyard. And that's been a challenge that we've had to deal with. Bureaucracy, of course, is like any other country, is a huge challenge. Right from the procedure of bringing this vaccine into the country to making it applicable in the field. Plenty of challenges there. And the cultural perception, like I said, we are trying to combat this to say we are not controlling the population of God, so as to say, but this is for the better of the species at large. There are several legal hurdles as well. A funny thing happened in a state called West Bengal in eastern India. The High Court of West Bengal was listening to a court case which dealt with elephant deaths on railway tracks. And while the judge was pronouncing his verdict on that case, we were in the room as well, and a random lawyer who had nothing to do with this case stood up out of nowhere and said the government also wants to sterilize elephants. And this magistrate, while dictating the order, said no population management measures will ever be undertaken for elephants in India. It came out of nowhere. In 10 seconds, it was done, dictated, set in stone. We've appealed against it in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has taken cognizance of it and is in the process of removing that ceiling that prevents us from doing so. And of course, there's been debates about the population estimate itself. There are various groups of scientists, various researchers who don't agree with one another, who can't see eye to eye with each other. Every time a new estimate comes out, there's somebody who criticizes it. Nonetheless, that's the numbers that we have to go by. We do not have the bandwidth or the wherewithal to go about counting every elephant in the country. We go by the numbers we have and the trend it indicates, and conflict numbers and conflict instances are not something that's arguable at all. The on-ground logistics are going to be a huge challenge and a huge nightmare when it comes to it. India, the terrain and the way it is, does not permit for helicopters to be flown. So there's no risk of JJ falling off a helicopter for that to go with. But yes, there is very, very thick, very dense plantation. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But that is a challenge we are very cognizant of. There is debate about how the Asian elephants will react to the vaccine, because that's not something that's been extensively tried in the past. To counter that, we are doing captive trials, just so we can document the effects. We are sure that there won't be any adverse effects, but we would like to study them and publish them as well. So there's no debate over that. Looking ahead, we definitely do want to bring in this technique into India, but what we want to ensure is a very heavily regulated use of this. There is fear that once you bring this technique, it's tried and tested, the government has access to it. What stops them from going around the country and vaccinating every animal that they see? That's the role that conservation organizations like us and welfare organizations like us play in bringing in these checks and balances for the government. That's the least bit we can do, and which is why it's so important for us to partner with the government in implementing this and not saying, here's the vial of vaccine, now you go do what you want. And that's pretty much been our role there. Of course, the biggest challenge is ensuring that we build capacity of the government agencies to say the right things. This is where we're looking at bringing a person on board who's just going to go about and doing institutional capacity building to make sure they understand and saying the right things when they do. And the one thing that we do want to understand is the social impact of population management on communities that are living around these animals. The assumptions that we have now is that they will hugely be benefited by it, and that's probably true, but it would be good for us to document that and make sure that we're on the right track on that front as well. Thank you for Botstiber for having us here, to HSI and Pathways Kenya for allowing us to conduct this session. And thank you so much for everyone.